The idea of the magic carpet is one that hasn't really been explored much in the past decade, and I don't really understand why not. And just imagine being able to go anywhere you want, flying through the sky without having to pay for gas and without having to worry about traffic. I don't know about you, but if someone invented real magic carpets today, they'd become a billionaire overnight. However, go back further than a decade, and magic carpets actually end up appearing in a lot of entertainment mediums, including today's ancient DOS game, which is called, quite simply, Magic Carpet. It is, without a doubt, one of the most unique games I've ever played, and despite how well received it was, it's curious that this game only ever got one sequel and then never went anywhere else. This is a game that desperately needs a modern sequel or remake, and you'll see why in a moment, but first, let's check out the game stats. Magic Carpet was developed by Bullfrog Productions and published by Electronic Arts in 1994. It's a 1 to 8 player 3D flight-based first-person shooter with support for both VGA 320x200 256 color graphics and high-res SVGA 640x480 256 color graphics. It supports multiple sound and music cards, so pick whichever one you feel works the best on your system. And as for its release date, it's still commercial and finding a copy is easy enough, but expect to pay a bit depending on the version you get. If you go for the original release, you shouldn't have to pay more than $5 or $10, but the original release crashes routinely due to the way spell icons are loaded. Instead, I highly recommend getting Magic Carpet Plus, which doesn't have this problem and even has some additional levels when you beat the main game, usually referred to as the Hidden Worlds. But this version of the game usually runs about $15 to $20 nowadays, and that's just for the disc. If you get the box and manuals and everything, expect to pay more. There's also supposedly a floppy disk version of this game, but I've never seen it anywhere. The story is very simple. A very long time ago, when the world was still new, the lands were rich in a magical power known as mana, and eventually the day came when mankind could extract mana from nature and use it for their own purposes. Now, this eventually left many of the lands barren and lifeless, and the wizards who controlled all the mana would end up creating monsters to do their bidding and to fight rival wizards. However, the monsters turned against their masters and began to take command of the world again. Of course. One particular wizard, fearing for his life, prepared a powerful spell with the help of his apprentice, Zanzibar. But the spell was so powerful it not only fractured the world, but incidentally killed the wizard too, thus leaving his apprentice with the task of restoring the world to equilibrium. Now, one thing I'm going to quickly clear up here is that even though this game is at its heart a first-person shooter, it doesn't play like any other first-person shooter out there. For one thing, the controls can take a little getting used to, but are ultimately extremely effective. You use the arrow keys to accelerate forwards and backwards and to strafe side to side, and you use the mouse to turn left and right and to pitch up and down. You never have to worry about roll, and you never have direct control over your altitude, as the carpet you're riding has a tendency to slowly float towards the ground. The curious part of the controls is that turning with the mouse creates constant turning acceleration, which, believe it or not, allows for some extreme maneuvers that simply couldn't be pulled off with traditional first-person mouse controls, where you'd only turn while moving the mouse. You can also play with a joystick or gamepad, but I find the mouse allows for much greater precision. Not that you need much in the way of precision to play this game, it is 100% impossible to crash in this game. Instead, your carpet simply automatically raises as high as necessary to get over an obstacle in the way. Heck, you'll actually spend many moments in the game completely ignoring the view in front of you and just watching the radar to see where you're going. Your spells also have quite the degree of automatic aim, and so long as you can see what you want to shoot at and it's not at the extreme edge of the screen, your shot should automatically lock on. So, because you can't crash, and because aiming is really easy, surviving this game comes down mostly to understanding the rules, understanding the many enemies you'll face, and understanding the many different spells you can gain access to. The goal of every world is to build a castle and fill it with mana. Special white dots on the mana meters for yourself in the castle indicate how much mana needs to be stored in the castle to restore a world. This is always a percentage of the mana presently in the world, so if more enemies start spawning in, more mana will need to be collected. Your status bars at the top show both the health and mana levels of your castle's hot air balloons, and yourself. The castle gauge also has a number on it to indicate what level your castle is at, from 1 to 7. As you collect more and more mana, you'll need to keep your castle upgraded so that it can all be stored. You also get more balloons as your castle is upgraded, and these balloons are kind of necessary because they pick up and transport loose mana orbs back to your castle. If a balloon gets destroyed, it will automatically be regenerated at your castle, but will drop any mana it was carrying at the time. Mana itself comes in the form of yellow orbs, which change color depending on who's laid claim to them. In a single player game, you always play as the white colored wizard Zanzimar, so any mana orbs you claim turn white. The other 7 wizards you may face are Vodor, Grishnak, Mahmud, Syed, Rashid, Alabal, and Scheherazade, who respectively fly the colors of red, purple, blue, green, pink, orange, and black. And that's the basic gist of the game, really. Build a castle, kill monsters, collect mana, restore a world, repeat 49 more times. If the game was nothing more than that, it would be boring and repetitive. But what makes the game so much more impressive is the arsenal of 24 different spells you can acquire, and just about every single one of them is unique in some way, meaning the better you understand the spells at your disposal, the easier it'll be to survive. Of course, before you can cast the spell, you have to find it. At first, spells come in red spell jars. You pick up the spell jar, you get the spell. Pretty simple. But you might not be able to cast it. Almost every spell requires that you have a certain minimum amount of mana stored in your castle before you can cast it. Later in the game, though, you may come across blue spell jars, which, for the remainder of a world, allow you to cast a particular spell regardless of how much mana is in your castle, even if you don't even have one. So let's take a quick look at all 24 spells so you can see just how unique they are. The first 3 spells I'm going to talk about are the first 3 spells you get in the game, as they are the most basic spells necessary to win. Fireball is an incredibly basic attack spell, and is actually the most efficient in terms of damage dealt versus mana used. The only catch is that despite being mana efficient, it's very time inefficient, and it takes many fireballs to destroy tougher targets. Essentially, you just use Fireball to get yourself started, then you'll likely switch to a stronger attack spell later on. Next we have Possession, which is used to claim mana that's either loose in the world or stored in a civilian building. Without Possession, you would, well, never be able to collect any mana. Then we have Castle, which you cast to initially build your castle, then cast again when it comes time to upgrade. Remember to keep in mind that the position of your castle is important, and you won't be able to upgrade if you put it too close to another structure or an impassable wall. If that happens, you can press Shift L at any point in time to scale back your castle by 1 level, even so far as to destroy it. You have to do it this way because you can't actually damage anything that belongs to you, or yourself for that matter. Now let's talk about the tactical spells that, in and of themselves, don't do any real damage to anything. First we have Accelerate Forward, which gives you a burst of forward speed for a short while. You can cancel the spell simply by reversing, and you can go even faster by casting the spell continually, though this will end up using a lot of mana. As with many spells that stay active for a period of time, your personal mana energy won't regenerate while any spells are active. There's also an Accelerate Backward spell, which doesn't have many uses except to quickly escape from a bad situation, to double backwards towards somewhere you just came from, or to break free from a duel, which I'll get to soon enough. Next is Heal, which quite simply converts mana energy into health. Next is Defend, which greatly reduces the amount of damage you take from enemies, so much so that you'll seemingly be invulnerable against the weaker enemies. The only catch is that each time you get hit while Defend is active, you'll lose some mana energy. Next is Rebound, which is kind of like Defend, except it only affects certain projectile attacks like Fireball, and causes those attacks to get flung right back at your attacker, while you take no damage at all. Next is Invisibility, which obviously makes you invisible. The usefulness of this spell though is pretty limited, since if you cast any other spells you become visible again, and there's some bugs with how the AI responds to you when you turn invisible. Quite frankly, this spell is best saved for multiplayer games. Next is Beyond Sight, which lets you see the positions of every enemy and their hot air balloons. It's useful when you want to track an enemy down, but the effect doesn't last very long, and really, the best way to get the attention of a rival wizard and know where they are is to just assault their castle. Next we have Teleport, which instantly teleports you to your castle, and then back again when you cast it a second time. Teleport has a bit of a minor bug to it though, in that if you cast it once, then just travel wherever and cast it again, it teleports you back to where you originally cast it from, and then you have to cast it again to go back to your castle. I understand why this happens, I just don't think it should have been done that way. That said, Teleport is extremely useful when you're desperately low on mana energy, since being in your castle not only makes you personally invulnerable, but also regenerates your health and mana energy very quickly. Next we have Mana Magnet, which is basically a possession spell that causes all nearby mana orbs to drift to where you shot the spell, allowing mana orbs to clump together so that they can be collected by your balloons more easily. Next is Duel, which basically locks you into position with a rival wizard so you can easily defeat them. The only way to break this spell once it's cast is if one of the wizards dies, or if one of them breaks free using an Accelerate spell. The last of the non-damaging spells is technically Steal Mana, which doesn't actually cause physical damage, but drains the personal mana energy of any rival wizard you shoot with it, making it more difficult for them to attack you or escape. Now we get into the attack spells, starting with Rapid Fireball, which is basically just a fireball spell that casts itself like a machine gun. It uses more mana per shot than the fireball spell does, but can be very effective against groups of weaker enemies since you can just strafe them. Next we have Wall of Fire, which basically creates a wall of fire around your target. It's not too terribly powerful compared to how much mana it takes, but it has the advantage of being able to damage anything else in the immediate vicinity. Next we have Lightning Bolt, which shoots a stream of lightning at your target. Lightning Bolt is not only really powerful, but can't be rebounded back towards you like a fireball can. The downside is that Lightning Bolt consumes a ton of mana energy, and has a fairly short range limit, about half the range you can get out of your other spells. There's also Lightning Storm, which creates a cloud of lightning bolts that are extremely powerful against castles and can also do considerable damage to groups of enemies. Though they're even more range limited than regular lightning bolts, and it takes a moment after you cast a storm for it to do its thing. Next is Earthquake, which creates a giant tunnel through the landscape, causing any ground-based enemies to die in an instant if it collapses the land underneath them. The trouble with Earthquake is you can't really control where it goes. So there's also the Crater spell, which simply creates a giant crater wherever you cast it, and again, any ground-based enemies that lose their footing will face an immediate death. The last 4 spells are probably the most powerful spells in the entire game, starting with Meteor. When you shoot a meteor at something, it results in a massive explosion that does tremendous damage and can damage multiple targets at once. As powerful as Meteor is though, it has one fatal drawback, in that it can be rebounded, so always be aware that that can happen. Next we have Undead Army, which raises a small army of skeleton warriors who will attack rival wizards, their castles, and their balloons. So all you have to do is cast this a few times near a rival wizard's castle, and they won't have much of a castle much longer. Though when you're done with an army, make sure you destroy them because they can ultimately turn on you if they have nothing better to do. Next is Volcano. Now this spell is evil. A single cast is enough to kill any wizard, and if cast in just the right spot, it can completely obliterate a level 7 castle. Even more crazy is that if the volcano continues to exist, it can actually erupt again in the future, doing even more damage. It is an extraordinarily powerful attack spell, superseded only by the most powerful spell in the game, Global Death. Now, Global Death is interesting. Even though it's incredibly powerful and can kill absolutely anything in a single cast, it's difficult to use. Basically, when you cast Global Death, you're planting an invisible time bomb. When this bomb goes off and the screen flashes purple, anything within the short range this bomb has will basically die, regardless of how much health it has. But that is the catch, is that you can't see where you put it. It takes a moment to explode, and it has a short range, so actually hitting anything with the Global Death spell takes a lot of practice. But once you know how to do it, it is extremely devastating. The enemies you face are pretty interesting too, and have quite the variety to them. I'm not going to go through them all or else this video would go on forever, but I do want to point out a few of the more interesting ones. The Griffins, for example, are actually very peaceful, and they never attack first. However, they not only intrinsically rebound attacks, but the moment you attack one, every Griffin in the immediate vicinity will go after you, and their lightning attacks are brutal. They're even invulnerable to castle upgrades, which would normally kill most enemies. The best way to take out a Griffin is with lightning attacks, plain and simple. The genies are extremely annoying. They can't actually do any damage to you, but they follow you around, laugh maniacally, and continually cast steal mana at you, making it difficult to cast your own spells. What's worse is that damaging a genie down to a certain point will cause it to teleport away, spend some time regenerating all of its health, then it teleports right back to your vicinity and starts the process all over again. The best way to defeat genies in this game is either with Global Death, with a volcano, or if you don't have the mana, get them around your castle, level your castle down with Shift L, then just level it back up. It's seriously the only surefire way to defeat them. The Wyverns though, they are not very friendly, to put it mildly. First of all, they have a ton of health. Second of all, they rapidly regenerate their health at all points in time. Thirdly, they have a rapid fireball attack that can not only kill you in 2 or 3 blasts, but also does no damage to them if you rebound it. Lastly, they are relentless and will attack the most convenient target they can find, which will either be a civilian, a wizard, or one of your castle's balloons. Sometimes it may also seem like they'll attack castles and buildings, but they generally don't. And it just seems this way because the kinds of targets they will attack can be in close proximity to these. If you're not ready to face a wyvern and you end up with one following you, well, the best thing to do is just get the heck away from them as fast as magically possible. If they're threatening your castle, the best thing you can do is claim some mana so that your balloons will go out, which may lure the wyvern away long enough to get it out of range of your castle. Or your other option is to attack the wyvern and then lead it away from your castle as best you can. However, so long as you have the lightning spell and so long as you have a level 4 castle or greater, you can defeat them. What you want to do is get your lightning ready, attack the wyvern you wish to defeat, then lure it back to your castle. Then just burn some lightning into it, let it attack for a moment so you can recharge for another burst, and keep this up until it dies. If your castle drops level, quickly arm your castle spell, get it back up to level 4, then go back to your lightning strikes. Actually, even though the AI seems pretty straightforward in this game, it does quite a lot of interesting things in the background. For example, whenever a wizard dies, they leave behind a corpse. If anyone possesses the corpse, it disappears and the wizard who possessed it will claim any loose mana orbs the fallen wizard had previously claimed before death. However, if a corpse gets ignored for long enough, you may go back to it and find that the vultures have started circling it, which is quite the nice touch to the AI. Another interesting aspect is that the skeleton archers and the human archers hate each other with a passion, and if they get within range of each other, they'll actually attack one another. So, we've established that this game is full of awesomeness. So, why is it that it didn't sell that well and was consigned to just a single sequel, then never to be heard from again? Well, there's a couple key reasons. The first is that Magic Carpet was directly competing with Doom, and as you can see, Magic Carpet and Doom have virtually nothing in common, but Doom was able to run on low-end 386 computers with 4 MB of RAM. Magic Carpet's system requirements were simply ridiculously high for the time when it came out, requiring a 486 processor minimum and at least 8 MB of RAM. Even more if you wanted the SVGA graphics support, or advanced graphics rendering settings such as the reflective water. The average home user simply didn't have that kind of hardware when this game was new. It's kind of analogous to when Crysis came out, and virtually no one was able to play that game at its maximum detail levels. Magic Carpet was, well, kind of the same way. There is one other key reason too. Magic Carpet was rushed to store shelves for whatever reason, and as a result, there's many bugs in this game. The original release was in fact so buggy that it was usually a gamble if you could make it to the end of a level or not without a crash back to DOS, and the last level usually couldn't even be beaten. Magic Carpet Plus thankfully has many of these bugs fixed, but not all of them. For example, you still have to take care not to overload the game with meteors, because if the frame rate drops below 1 frame a second, it's almost guaranteed to cause a crash back to DOS. This could be why there was never a second sequel either, because the second Magic Carpet game was also rushed to store shelves with various crash bugs. Well, these games could have been so much more if they didn't have all these issues. But hey, even with all the crashing issues, it's still a ridiculously fun and challenging game, and I recommend everyone into DOS gaming give it a shot at some point or another. There's even a couple neat little bonus features I want to quickly mention. The 3D anaglyph and random dot stereogram modes. I bought my original copy of this game many years ago, new in box, and it came with a fairly sturdy pair of red-blue 3D glasses, and this game's anaglyph mode is perfectly calibrated for these glasses, so much so that there's practically no ghosting with any of the effects, and they still have some semblance of color to them. Of course, as you can see, the frame rate kind of died when I switched to it. The anaglyph mode does so much intensive blending that it really only works well when running at the standard 320x200 VGA resolution. More curious though is the RDS random dot stereogram mode, and I think this could be the only commercial game in existence that does this. If you're able to see the 3D in these kinds of images, then imagine trying to play a 3D game like this. To be honest, this mode feels like it was abandoned, because the depth in it is very shallow and happens in stages rather than being smooth transitions. Not to mention you can only see shapes, not colors, so it's very hard to tell what's what in this mode. Anyways, this was a long episode, but I'm almost done because the DOSBox settings are really simple. All you need to do is set the cycles count to max and you're good to go. But you may also want to set the CPU type to Pentium Slow, as this will automatically activate all the graphical enhancements when you boot the game. Otherwise, you'd have to turn them all on manually every time you play. Also, because this was a CD game, you probably want to make an ISO of the CD itself, just so you can get faster loading times. You don't have to keep your CD in the drive every time you want to play. And lastly, if you decide to use a joystick or gamepad, you're going to have to remap a lot of the controls using DOSBox's key mapper. The defaults the game forces you to use are simply not very friendly. The game was clearly designed around keyboard and mouse controls. Anywho, that's all for this episode of Ancient DOS Games. Stay tuned for episode 44, where we're going to take a look at a Boulder Dash clone, where you play as, well, it looks like a red 3D Pac-Man of all things. If you know which games like that, then send your guess to adg@pixelships.com, and stay tuned for next Saturday to check it out.